Welcome to this community newspaper Facebook program, Excellence in Education. This is Marta Perez, and our mission is to expose and inspire excellence in education. Please follow us on Facebook and send questions via our chat room. Now, please allow me to introduce a very important person in our school district and in our community. He is Ron Steiger, our Chief Financial Officer, which includes responsibilities for traditional financial functions, plus procurement, which is all the things the school district buys and pays for, and risk management, which is the substantial amount of insurance that the school district must buy. We have so much to talk about today, so please allow me to introduce our very special guest, Mr. Ron Steiger. Welcome.
Yep.
And first, before we begin, tell us a little bit about your background and how you grew up.
Okay. So my name's Ron Steiger. Actually, I'm born and raised in South Florida. I grew up in North Miami Beach, and I went to North Miami Beach Senior High School.
Okay.
So I'm a product of the Miami-Dade County Public Schools. I went to school at up north, and then I spent about 8 years in Chicago, working for a very large consulting company and actually an advertising agency. And then I went to business school there. And then I came back down to Miami to work in education. Actually, at the time I was considering whether to be an investment banker or go into government. And in government, it was either going to be the FBI or the public school system.
Uh-huh.
And the public schools won the day. I figured that there's no more important mission in the world. If I can spend my life trying to make the public education system better, that was a life well spent.
Well, that's wonderful, because not only are you so brilliant, but you have such a great heart, and your heart is in doing what's right. And our community is so blessed. Our school district, our students are so blessed, because the spending of the money is very important. And we've seen that government doesn't have a great reputation for spending money. And even in the past, the school districts, perhaps when given big lumps of money, have not spent it appropriately. So you are doing God's work, and we are also grateful to you. And I can say what a very talented Chief Financial Officer you are, and how proud we are of you at the school district, and how wonderfully you do your job.
Well, thank you.
So first, I didn't say, I'd like you to say just how big Miami-Dade County Public Schools budget is, and how many moving pieces it has. And that's before, I want you to explain that, and then we're going to talk about what's coming down the pipe.
Sure. So our budget, in a normal year, our budget is about $6 billion. So a little over $3 billion in operating money that we use to pay for teachers and custodians. And the operations.
Is the largest part of our budget is
the operating
payroll,
budget. Yes. Right. So of our total budget, 80% is payroll. And so, but about $3 billion, a little over $3 billion, we spend on operating. Just the actual cost to run our schools. And then we have the referendum, right, which is technically part of the general fund, but we have the referendum that the community passed back in 2018, and that's about $250 million strictly for 88% on teacher salaries and 12% on officers for our schools. And then we have our capital fund, which pays for the buildings themselves. So imagine if you pick up a school and shake it, everything that doesn't fall out, that's paid for by capital.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have grants, and all the many grants we have. And that, I think, is where you're going, where we might see a very large expansion that's about to happen through the federal government.
Yes. And these monies that are coming in are considered grants?
They are. So the federal government has passed, since the beginning of COVID-19, the federal government has passed 3 big acts to fund some of the repercussions that have emerged from COVID. The first was the CARES Act in April of 2020.
And would you like to put up a slide to
Sure.
show
So
all the people? This is just amazing.
slide.
Kind of like incredible, the amounts of monies and when they're coming and when they're going to expire, and how we're going to be able to account for all of this. Go
Yes.
ahead.
So I see now that the viewers can see the different buckets. The first is the CARES Act, and ESSER is just the public school portion of each of these acts. So the CARES Act, which was passed by President Trump in April of 2020, saw Miami-Dade County Public Schools ourselves get $91.9 million. And if you add in the charter schools and private schools, together we in the entire South Florida community got $119.3 million out of this ESSER 1, or the CARES Act. Then in December of 2020, President Trump signed into law the CRRSA Act, and that the public school portion, we called it ESSER 2. And to the public schools is $366.6 million, or the Miami-Dade County Public Schools, us and charters together, and of course charters are also public schools, receive $468.5 million. And we have to spend that by September 2023. I should say for the CARES Act, we had to spend for September 22, and we've already spent that. So that really was to fund the extra expenses it took to operate and run our schools just this year, and also account for the revenue loss, because as you can imagine, there was a substantial revenue loss on the state side in terms of sales taxes, which is the major way that the state uses to fund education. And then the last portion was signed by President Biden in March. And the reason why it says it's still estimated is because we haven't yet officially received our allocation, but just knowing the law and being able to read it myself, we can calculate what our portion will be. And it's going to be about 823.3 just for Miami-Dade County Public Schools, a little over $1 billion. So if we even exclude ESSER 1, because we know that money's spent, then between ESSER 2 and ESSER 3, our school district, which the board manages, will get a little just under $1.2 billion to spend over the next 3 years. And we have so many potential needs that have emerged from COVID.
Yes.
Right? Whether it is the lack of like a learning loss that our kids have suffered over the last year.
Yes.
Or the mental and sometimes physical trauma that they've gone through. It's amazing how often you'll hear now, like little kids who've had to deal with parent loss. Right. And oftentimes in our community, parent loss sometimes means housing loss as well. These are things that they bring to school with them that we're going to have to treat.
So in summary of your chart, we've already spent how much?
We've already spent just around $90 million.
$90 million, sort of catching up and surviving the pandemic so far. And people will say, how do you spend 91 million? Well, there's a lot of things, and what you said, some of the monies that didn't come in to fill holes, and basically just keep the district running. Now we have the opportunity, but in the next 3 years, we have to spend all of this money and play catch up to this unprecedented problem that we face in our community. So tell us what the plan is about going forward in these next 3 years.
Sure. And I don't necessarily see it as we have to spend money. You're right that it's a grant, but it really is an opportunity to strategically think what's the best way to not only fix a lot of the issues that our students have come in with, whether it's mental health or whether it's learning. It's also how can we use these funds to advance the strategic plan that the board has just spent the last few months building and the community has spent the last few months building, right? How can we pivot to Miami-Dade County Public Schools over the next 20 years? It is certainly a historic influx of funds that we don't often get
ever.
And the last thing that I would ever want to do as the CFO is view this as a way to right historical wrongs or throw money into problems that I know is going to give us bigger financial problems down the road. Right? We have to use this money strategically, and we have to come up with a plan. Now, we got lucky that the strategic planning process just happened. So we've already identified, and the community has identified all of the student needs. The community and the board have identified what our priority should be moving forward over the next 5 years. And this is a unique opportunity to fund that. So we have gone through a process where we have asked ourselves a series of strategic questions on investments, right? What's the best strategic investment we could make? Is this investment sustainable even after any money's gone? Or can we solve a problem within a few years and then have that expenditure ramp down? And is it measurable, right? Because if it's not measurable, then it's just anecdotal if it actually happens. So we have to, every investment we make, we have to get an ROI. We have to be able to prove that the money is well spent, that our taxpayer funds. And, I think you're right that sometimes government entities get a reputation for misspending or inefficiently spending public dollars. And, when I started in the budget office, if you remember when we first met, Rudy Crew was the superintendent, and I had just started with the school district, and my job was doing special projects for Rudy Crew and the superintendent. And one day I was called into his office, and it was just him and Miss Hantman, who was the board chair still at the time. And he said, you're going to have to go down to the budget office. This was in 2008. And I said, okay, how long am I going to be there? And he's like, oh, you'll be there indefinitely. And he was right, because I've been working in that ever since. But the problem was the same, is that the district had seen, as you well know, the district had seen a long history of not necessarily being the best manager of public funds.
Absolutely.
And we used to get away with it because our enrollment was always increasing, right? And for 125 years straight, we only saw growth in enrollment. It helps being a monopoly, right? So when you're a monopoly, you can afford to get away with these inefficiencies. But that's not the Miami-Dade Public Schools I knew.
I know, sir.
So I never started with that. So I came in and the bill came due, right? That's when I started in the budget office. Of 125 years, the bill came due, where from 2001 to 2008, we weren't growing FTE anymore. We weren't growing the number of students we had any longer. A lot of those kids were moving to charter schools. They started, because of the increasing prices of housing in Miami, they have started to move out of Miami, young families.
Yes.
And so we saw a decrease in enrollment, and yet we didn't necessarily change our spending patterns. So we got to 2008. That's when I started. And it occurred to me then, and this is just when Mr. Carvalho started as superintendent as well. We both started in the jobs kind of at our lowest moment. And you can't make these type of financial decisions without a strategy around it, right? You can't do this. You can, but it's not wise to do this without the community involved. It's not right to do this without the board guiding the work. And that's what we spent that first few years doing. Is we now have a standing community budget committee. We get principals involved from the beginning throughout the entire process. We have town halls and workshops with the board the entire year. And, I don't view my job as, I often get called the money man, but I don't necessarily view my job as a decision maker at all. My job is to present options, right? I see the reality of where we are. My job is to share that with the community, share that with the world. Hey, this is where we are. These are our options, and then help guide the conversation through.
And you do it masterfully, because it isn't easy. And sometimes, I cringe when I hear some of the comments, etc. But it's all part of being in a community. It's all part of coming to a consensus and coming up with strategies. So, as you have said, we have been working, the community has been working, we've been getting input. What finally, for this coming couple of years to 2024, what has the community said, and what is the consensus of everyone about where we need to spend the monies, this substantial amount of monies that we're going to be receiving?
Sure. And if you can put up slide 12, then they'll get a bigger picture. And
there.
So and the community has only given partial feedback. So we've spoken to our community budget committee. We've spoken to our principals committee. We have now spoken to the board and gotten board feedback multiple times. So we're finally in a place where I feel we have a plan that we're really ready to share with the community and get meaningful consultation and two-way feedback here. But we have kind of bucketed, there's all these assurances from the state, from the federal government and the state, that where we are allowed to spend our money, we've kind of bucketed in these 4 areas. One is to accelerate learning. And like, as we discussed, I think our teachers and our students did a great job over the last year, but I think we all learned that online learning is not for everybody.
No.
And it is not the same as in-person learning.
Absolutely.
And we have a great number of our students who have not advanced the full year that we would have wanted them to for our school year that took place in 2021.
Absolutely.
And we need to catch them up.
Absolutely.
And it is expensive to do so. So we usually have a small summer school. This year we have a 60,000 plus kids summer school. Right. That costs.
How has it been going? What is your?
Well, we're now 4 days in. Today's the 4th day of it, and my understanding it is becoming very popular.
Good.
Our enrollment is tracking expectations.
Good, because I must say that I've spoken to. This is anecdotal on my part, but a lot of people don't know, and a lot of people say, "I can't afford." I've heard a lot of people, "I can't afford summer school," because in general, summer schools are expensive, all these camps and things. And we have that option that I hope that anyone listening will take advantage of, because it is a beautiful summer school. Go ahead and
it's completely free.
And it's completely free.
Completely free summer school all day long. It's a lot of our summer school is not necessarily just like the regular school year. There's a lot of different programs wrapped up, what we're calling Summer 305.
Yeah, and fun. I know that's one of the big goals is for the kids to have fun, to remember that it's fun to go to school, so that we entice them back. Yes.
Yeah, and I think it is important that you're right, that it's important that our students, while they need reading to catch up in reading, they need to catch up in math. It's important that school is not just reading and math over and over.
Right.
School has to be electives, and it's band and athletics and all of the other things that students have been deprived of.
Yes.
We have to start bringing that back into their lives, because that's what makes school fun to go to.
Yes. And that's how they're going to go.
Yes, exactly. So that's one bucket, is this accelerate learning. Right. Another, and this has been a heavy conversation at the board level, is to promote mental and physical health.
Very.
Right. So we have had obviously among our employees, we've had a lot of COVID related expenses. And that's the case countywide in all industries. Is we as a community have seen we've gone through a very large public health issue, and costs go up for that. But I think now we're going to start seeing it switch from physical health over to mental health, right? So if a student shows up to school in a place where he or she's not ready to learn, then they're not going to be. So that's going to be part of our big expense over the next year or two, is getting kids in a place where they're ready to learn again, where there's not an anxiety sitting on them, right? Just to go into that classroom again. So I think you'll especially see those first 90 days will be different for our kids, will be different than a normal first 90 days of school, because it's going to have to tackle a lot of the mental health issues, which of course comes at a cost, but it's a cost that now we have these funds to bear.
And may I interject? And also the mental health of our teachers.
Absolutely.
Because our teachers have gone through the ringer, and it's been a very difficult year. And many of them talk about our students need help, mental health. Many of our teachers need that too. And I hope that with the monies, we're going to be able to also reach out to our teachers that have our strength.
Absolutely. And I know that Sally Allion in the Office of Mental Health has a whole plan just for professional development on self-care, right? And for our employees, and ensuring that when our teachers come back to the schools, they're also ready to teach, ready to learn, and they don't have some of the, you're right, that they don't have a lot of the anxieties that have been weighing on them over the past year as well.
It has been a very difficult year for them, trying to get the kids to stay online. Some, it's been very, very challenging. So
Yeah, and
it's good that we're going to be able to spend on them also.
Yeah, and I think a third area is we know now, it's hindsight's always 2020, but we know now how we could have been better prepared, how we as a country could have been better prepared. And we have an opportunity to prepare ourselves for whatever comes next. And that's the third bucket we plan on spending this money on, is making sure that if we ever get put in this situation again, that we might need to close. Let's get us prepared. What can we do to make our schools far less likely for virus transmission, right? How can we invest in additional HVAC equipment or air conditioning with the great filters? How can we train our staff from food service to transportation to our teachers to make sure that they're on the lookout for how can we have schools that aren't so prone to transmit viruses? We've all become so accustomed over the years to sending our kids to school and assuming they get sick. Right? We send our little kids and like, oh, well, they're going to come back sick now. I don't think that's a luxury we have any longer, to be able to just shrug our shoulders and say kids get sick. We have to try to actively change our practices so that doesn't happen.
Do you think, Ron, because it says prepare for and avoid. Do you think that we will ever close schools down again, given this horrific experience?
Well, so, I never say never, but we hope to be able to do all that we can to avoid it, right? So everything we can.
It is so disruptive.
Yeah, even small things on our part, small little things that don't cost any money. For years, we've rewarded perfect attendance.
I know,
right?
I know, and I always cringe a little bit about that.
We encourage people to show up sick, right? And even as a society, we value that. We're like, well, you take pride in coming to work even though you're sick, right? We start that off as a young kid. Like, I know you're sick, you can still go to school. We have to change that culture, change the entire culture of our schools, right? I think, and that's really the biggest, I think one of the biggest things we could do over the next few years is change the culture, not just around, hey, don't come to school sick, but making sure that the entire school experience feels welcoming, feels a place you can be honest, right? That there are no negative repercussions for saying, hey, I'm sick, I want to be able to get an education.
Right.
Can I get that from home in a way while I'm sick? We should try that.
But understanding that our mouthpiece are our teachers, and they are the face of education. Someone said, when people talk about education, they think about the teacher. They don't think about the principal. They don't think about the superintendent necessarily. So how do we make these professionals, how do we equip them? How do we support them? I think that's something that is very crucial in finding the excellence in education that we're aspiring for. That's why I'm always asking the questions about, okay, but what are we going to do for the teachers? Because they are, in research, the number one most effective thing in helping student achievement is the quality of the teachers. So we want to attract the best and the brightest. And so there.
Yeah. And I would say, so I think I agree with you that the teacher probably is, and I wouldn't say that's wrong. The teacher should be the face of that kid's education. And it's over the last few years, our average teacher salary between the referendum and some additional allocations from the state, our average teacher salary has gone up by about 25%. So what used to be a very difficult profession to get into, we have now been able to make as relatively enticing as compared to other careers. And I would say, as important as the teacher is, almost equally as important, because it's the first face a parent often sees and the student often sees, is the secretary at the front desk.
Yes.
Right. So how can we make sure that experience from the first moment that you see that the secretary waiting to greet you, or the security guard at the front door, right? The security guard at the front door, the secretary at the desk, from the assistant principal to the principal to the teacher, to the administrator, to the region, to central office, to the superintendent, to the board. How can that whole experience really be transformed to focus on the student customer experience? Right. And I think we have an opportunity over the next 3 years to do that.
The fourth a priority for the spending categories. Tell us about that, because we're kind of speaking about that now. And
Sure. And I think the fourth is to ensure that we can maintain our operations and retain our employees, even in the face of some pretty substantial revenue loss. So, when you we don't have an income tax in this state, which means the state's reliant on sales taxes. So when Disney closes down for 2 months, when the cruise ships close down for an entire year, when our tourism business takes a few months off, it's a really big impact on how much revenue the state can raise.
Right.
So what we're using the last bucket for is to ensure that every employee can keep his job and continue to get a paycheck, even if they lose the position. So the position might be gone, right? We can't budget it out of their normal general fund like we normally would. How can we pay for them out of this funds on a temporary basis until through attrition we can find them a permanent spot? So I would say, if there's any employees listening, then the school board, the superintendent have made the guarantee that you will not lose your job for financial reasons. You have a job, even if your position goes away, you have a job for next year. It is a huge priority among the board and the superintendent, and we can make that commitment because of these funds.
Okay, we're almost running out of time, so I'm going to switch a little bit more personal.
Okay.
If you had a magic wand or a magic bullet for education, what would you ask for? What would you change?
It's an interesting question. When I first started with the school district, I always was looking for just that. Like, I come from I'm a private sector background guy. I went to one of the world's leading business schools, and I assumed that this was, a classic organization where, 20% of the employees do 80% of the work, and it's unions that are the problem, and it's that it's a big public issue, and it's government that's the problem. And what's interesting is it's really, I haven't found that to be true at all. I found that there are passionate, caring people who dedicate so much time of their lives, and they're in everything they have, yet they're frustrated. And they're frustrated at every level of the organization, right? It's frustrating sometimes to be a parent, right? A student, a teacher, a clerk, right? Up through the administration, all the way through to it's frustrating being a school board member often, right?
Yes.
All the way through. It is frustrating. And there really is no one magic solution to what I would love, right? If I had one magic wand, I wish that people could see the world, right? So see the public education and understand that it's not because of inefficient spending. It is not that it's
necessarily.
It's not necessarily government. It's not a publicly elected school board. It's not the unions. It's that we have a lot of opinions in this community on what's the best path forward, right? A lot of different things pulling us in different directions. And what you see in the school district is writ large what we see as a problem as an entire country, is that we get so entrenched in our point of view that it's tough to see anything else, and it gets everybody frustrated. And so what I like, I guess my magic wand is the same I would use to fix any big public issue, which is I wish that we could see the world from each other's eyes a little bit clearer.
And the last question, because we're running out of time. Who is your hero?
My hero is probably my mother. So it's always my mother's had to reinvent herself, right? Life isn't linear. It never is. We think it is, right? We think we get on a track, and that's what's going to happen for the rest of our lives. But often that's not the case. Often it requires a series of reinventions, right? To make life in your constant pursuit of happiness, right? It requires us to constantly reinvent ourselves. And my mother has done that better than anyone I could have ever imagined, right? And it's been a great learning for me to watch her.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. There's so much more. I have so many more questions. Please come back and explain to us so many moving parts that our budgets have. You've been a wonderful guest, and thank you all for watching. And please come back and join us again for our program, Excellence in Education. Bye.